It always starts the same way. She looks at you, not as you are, but as who she hopes you might become. There's something in her gaze. Not love, exactly. Not yet. More like recognition or prophecy. And you feel it, that warmth, that pull. The sense that you've been chosen for something just out of reach. But you haven't been chosen. You've been imagined. Measured against a fantasy you didn't know you were auditioning for. And for a while, you try to live up to it. You lean into the role, hoping it will become real. But something in you knows, this isn't love, this is projection. And when the illusion cracks, you're left with the silence, confused, discarded, wondering what you did wrong. But maybe the better question is, who were you before you became her idea of a man? You thought it was connection, that moment when her eyes found you, when her voice softened just for you. It felt like something ancient was waking up. But it wasn't ancient. It was unconscious. What you mistook for love was actually recognition, not of who you are, but of who she's been carrying inside her all along. A figure, a symbol, a silhouette formed by fragments of stories, wounds, desires she never voiced. She wasn't choosing you, she was selecting a vessel. Carl Jung had a word for this: projection. The psyche's attempt to reclaim what it has lost by assigning it to someone else. It's not malicious, it's a survival strategy, a spiritual reflex. We don't see others as they are. We see them as mirrors for the parts of ourselves we can't quite touch. And nowhere is this more potent or more dangerous than in love. When a woman projects her animus, the internal masculine image, she doesn't know she's doing it. She may believe she's falling for your confidence, your strength, your silence. But what she's really falling for is an inner figure she's never met. Someone born from childhood impressions, cultural stories, and buried longings. You're not the cause, you're the canvas. And if you're not grounded in your own sense of self, you won't notice this happening. In fact, you'll like it, because projection feels flattering, especially to a man who's been starving for recognition. You'll tell yourself, she sees me, but that's the lie. She doesn't see you. She sees the man she hopes you might become. And you'll play along, not because you're deceptive, but because you're just as unconscious. You've been trained, subtly, constantly, to derive your worth from the way a woman looks at you, to feel valuable only when reflected in her eyes. So when she projects, you don't resist. You conform, you contort, you perform. You step into the fantasy thinking it will become love. But it doesn't, because love can only happen between two people, and projection only requires one. This is the great misunderstanding that breaks so many men. They confuse being chosen with being known. They believe they've finally been seen, when in truth, they've simply become a convincing actor in someone else's dream. And this dream, her animus-driven ideal, is seductive. It makes you feel powerful, desired, exceptional, but it is also conditional, because the moment you deviate from the role, the spell breaks. You speak your mind, and she flinches. You falter, and she pulls away. You become real, and the fantasy begins to collapse. That collapse is not your failure. It's the system returning to truth, but it hurts. Because no one ever taught you this. No one ever told you that being desired can be just as dehumanizing as being ignored. And yet here you are, wondering why it felt so right and ended so wrong. Why you gave your best and ended up discarded. Why the connection seemed real, but couldn't survive your authenticity. The answer isn't in what you did. It's in what you were doing without realizing it. You weren't in a relationship. You were in a projection, not hers alone, yours too. Because a man who doesn't know who he is will always fall for the fantasy that tells him who he might be. And that is how the theater begins. Two actors, both convinced The other is real, neither aware they're reading from scripts written long before they met. There's a part of her you've never met, a voice inside her mind that sounds like authority, like certainty, like truth. Jung called it the Animus, the inner masculine image that lives within every woman. It isn't evil, it isn't conscious, it's a composite, formed by the men she's known, the myths she's absorbed, the cultural noise she's internalized. The Animus speaks in absolutes. It offers sharp opinions, moral judgments, visions of what a man should be. And when it's unconscious, when it hasn't been examined, questioned, or integrated, it doesn't just live inside her, it acts through her. She doesn't fall for you, she falls for the projection of that internal figure, her imagined ideal of what a real man looks like. You become the target of that longing, the placeholder for that unmet archetype. But here's the twist. While she's projecting that fantasy outward, you're doing something just as dangerous inward. You're putting on a mask, not one you picked consciously, one that was slowly shaped by the desire to be chosen, to be enough, to be loved. Maybe it started early. Maybe you learned that being agreeable made you safe, or that strength without softness made you respected. Maybe no one ever taught you the difference between being admired and being loved, so you became what was needed. You adjusted your tone, your posture, your opinions. You crafted a version of yourself that could pass through her filters, not because you're manipulative, but because you were trained to believe that adapting is what makes you lovable. But the cost is always the same. You lose yourself in her imagination. You forget who you were before you became her mirror. And this is where the two forces collide. Her unconscious projection, your unconscious performance. It looks like passion, it looks like fate, but underneath it's codependence in disguise. Two incomplete selves orbiting around a shared illusion. And when the mask slips, when your real self shows up, the fantasy cracks. She pulls away, confused or disappointed. Not because you lied, but because you failed to sustain a role that was never yours to begin with. And here's the tragedy. She never really saw you, and you never really showed yourself. You mistook projection for intimacy. She mistook imagination for love. And what's left in the wake of that collapse isn't just heartbreak. It's the terrifying question, who am I if I'm not who she wanted me to be? It doesn't happen all at once. The unraveling is subtle. At first, she stops laughing as easily. Her gaze drifts. The silence between messages stretches just a little longer. You tell yourself she's just busy, or tired, or overthinking. But a deeper part of you, the part that stopped lying, knows the truth. The spell is breaking. And you're the one fading. She's not angry, not yet. She's disappointed, but not in something you did. In something you stopped being, and you feel it. Like being erased in real time. You offer more, you try harder, you get softer, sweeter, smaller. But the more you give, the more she slips away. Because the version of you she was in love with isn't the one standing here now. It's the projection, the echo of her fantasy, the one who never doubted, never stumbled, never pulled back the mask. And when the illusion cracks, it cuts both ways. She feels betrayed, not by your deception, but by the disruption of her dream. And you feel abandoned, not just by her, but by the part of yourself that believed this was finally real. That pain you're feeling, it's not just heartbreak, it's disorientation, the collapse of a role you didn't even know you were playing. And yet, you blame yourself. You think, if I had just been more confident, more stable, more stoic. As if love were something to be earned through performance. But this isn't about worth. This is about projection. And projections by nature are unsustainable. You didn't fail her. You failed to sustain the illusion she cast over you. And in doing so, You gave her the gift she wasn't ready to receive. Reality. Because reality is never as tidy as fantasy. It's flawed, uncertain, inconsistent, and that's where real love begins. But only if both people are willing to stay when the masks fall. Most aren't. So instead, she rewrites the story, turns you into the villain, or the disappointment, or just the man who didn't live up to his potential. And you start to question everything, not just the relationship, but your own identity. Because if you weren't who she saw, and you weren't who you pretended to be, then who are you? That question, that quiet, terrifying, necessary question, is where the real descent begins. This is the moment most men avoid. The silence after collapse. The space where no one is affirming you, choosing you, reflecting back your imagined worth. Just you and the mirror. And for the first time, there's no role to play, no fantasy to sustain, no one to impress. Just the raw weight of your own existence, unadorned, unchosen, and fully yours. This is where Jung begins his work, not in the glow of romance, but in the debris of delusion. He called it individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole by integrating the parts of yourself you've disowned. Most men never begin. They return to the comfort of performance. They find a new woman, a new fantasy, a new role to inhabit. Anything to avoid the ache of their own unworthiness. Because facing yourself is a kind of death. Not dramatic, not mythic, but slow, intimate, psychological. The death of the persona. The mask you wore to feel loved. The illusion that her affection could save you. Individuation demands you bury that illusion, and in its place plant something unshakable. The truth of who you are without the need to be seen. It's not heroic, it's not cinematic, it's lonely, repetitive. You'll sit with shame, anger, grief. Not to get rid of them, but to listen. You'll begin to see how much of your life was lived in reaction to what women wanted. How much of your masculinity was shaped by the hope of being chosen. And slowly, painfully, you'll begin to strip it all back. Not to become colder, but to become real. Because the man who is rooted in himself, not in performance, not in projection, not in pleasing, is the man who cannot be seduced by fantasy. He is not waiting to be selected. He is not molding himself to fit desire. He is not living as an answer to someone else's question. He is living as himself, flawed, complex, unapologetic, and from that place, everything changes. Not instantly, not all at once, but foundationally, because you are no longer outsourcing your worth. You are no longer looking to be completed. You are no longer mistaking attention for love. You are no longer a character in someone else's myth. You are the author of your own. Something strange happens when you stop performing. The room feels different. Conversations shift. People look at you, but they don't quite know what they're seeing, especially women. At first, they're drawn in. There's something about you, calm, grounded, untouchable. You're no longer reaching, no longer subtly asking, "Am I enough for you?" And that absence, it commands attention, but it also stirs discomfort. Because the woman who is still unconscious, still possessed by her animus, doesn't know how to relate to a man who isn't trying to earn her approval. She calls you distant, cold, emotionally unavailable. But what she really means is, I can't control you. You've stepped off the stage. You've stopped reading from the script. And now she doesn't know where to place you. This is where you begin to feel the cost of your awakening. You are no longer who you were, the man willing to contort, to perform, to seek. But you haven't yet met those who see without projecting, and so you stand in the in-between, visible but not understood. It's tempting to go back, to soften your truth just enough to be liked, to dim your clarity just enough to be invited in. But you've seen too much. You've seen what happens when you trade integrity for intimacy. You've seen what it costs to be loved for a version of yourself that isn't real. And here's what you come to understand. The feminine doesn't seek comfort, not at its core. It seeks mystery, the man she cannot fully define or possess. The man who holds a boundary, not as a wall, but as a truth. Because real masculine presence doesn't yield to projection. It dissolves it. And in doing so, it demands that the woman confront her own inner world. Most won't, not yet, but a few will. And they'll see you, not as a fantasy, not as a savior, but as a mirror. And they won't run, because they've done the work too. There comes a moment, quiet, almost forgettable, where something inside you shifts. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself, to prove yourself, to be received in a certain light. You've stopped performing, not out of rebellion, not out of bitterness, but because the performance has simply become too heavy to carry. This is freedom, but not the kind they sell you. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like stillness, a kind of radical inner silence that says, I no longer need to be chosen to know who I am. That silence unsettles people. It threatens those still entangled in performance and projection. They don't know what to do with a man who is self-sourced. Not defiant, not aloof, just unmovable. You'll notice it in their reactions. The hesitation, the subtle pushback, the way conversations turn slightly awkward. You don't give them the cues they're used to. No posturing, no self-deprecation to put them at ease, no hunger for validation. And for the first time, you see how much of human interaction is theater. Scripts, roles, performances traded for comfort. But you're done rehearsing. You're not here to be impressive. You're here to be real. And when you meet a woman from this place, when you meet her, you'll know. Because she won't ask you to perform. She won't need you to be her fantasy. She won't project her unlived life onto your shoulders and call it love. She'll meet you as she is, not as a goddess, not as a girl, but as a woman. Whole, complex, human, and the connection, if it happens, won't feel euphoric. It will feel clean, no seduction, no testing, no psychic tug-of-war, just two people standing beside each other, not completing, not rescuing, but witnessing. This is what love looks like after projection dies. Not perfection, but presence. And this is the final paradox Jung understood so well. When you no longer need love to feel whole, you become someone who can finally give it freely, without clinging, without pretending, without fear. Because you're not offering yourself as a role anymore. You're offering yourself as a man. This is the part where most men turn back. Not because the path ahead is unclear, but because it's too honest, too costly. To become whole, truly whole, is to let every false version of yourself die. The charming one, the agreeable one, the savior, the chameleon, all of them. And there's grief in that. Grief for the boy who thought love was something you earned by disappearing. Grief for the man who measured his worth by how much he could be wanted. Grief for all the moments you felt seen, but never known. But beneath that grief is something deeper. Responsibility. Because once you see the pattern, it's yours to break. You can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending you were just a victim of her fantasy. Because you volunteered for the role, and now you know it. Jung didn't hand out comfort, he handed out mirrors. And if you keep looking into that mirror, past the shame, past the longing, past the need, you'll see something terrifying. You'll see yourself. Not as she imagined you, not as you hoped to be, but as you are, right now. And that's the moment you choose. You can recoil, blame her, blame women, blame culture, build an identity around being misunderstood, rejected, betrayed. Or you can do what Jung demanded of the man who would not be ruled by fantasy. You can turn inward, not to isolate, but to integrate, to become the kind of man who doesn't chase illusions and doesn't need to cast them either. And when you do, when you carry your own soul, you stop making women your mirror. You stop needing their approval to feel alive. You stop looking for a relationship to give you purpose. You start giving yourself back to the world, not as a role, but as a presence. You don't become heartless. You become whole, and that's the man the world never prepares you to be. Not the performer, not the rescuer, not the one who wins her love by disappearing, but the man who stands alone, fully awake, fully responsible, fully alive. So here's the truth. If you've made it this far, you've already begun. This message didn't just speak to you, it called you. Now the only question that matters is, will you answer it?